Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to A to Z Running. Hey everybody, welcome to the A to Z Running podcast where we help runners thrive. I'm Andi.
And I am Zach. And to better understand how other people influence us as runners, we unpack research on social influences and their effects on exercise and running in this episode. And stick around after that for the latest from the world of running, including more fast indoor track action and a reflection on what people shout at runners during races.
Yeah, which is pretty interesting.
Might be. But before you do any of those things, make sure you go to AtoZrunning.com and look for the word follow, because then you'll receive all the best things there are to receive about running, including our monthly digest, which only goes out to subscribers. And since it's free to subscribe, you definitely should be a subscriber, as well as better opportunities to ask questions that can then be featured on our end of month question and answer episode.
So we love to connect with you. We say it every week. This week I posted about gaining traction in adverse conditions and the different ways that some of us will do that. So I had posted about the ice bikes, and we'll put those in the bottom of our trainers, and we'll drive to dirt if it's not completely covered in snow. You don't want to run on pavement with ice bikes. That's not good. So I asked what some of you do when the conditions are rough, and Dan O and Holly both recommend Kahatola nano spikes specifically. Both talked them up quite significantly. And then for less slippery weather that still requires extra traction, Kathy, Anna, and Dr. Witt use trail shoes. And Kathy even has a pair of trail shoes with ice spikes. That's pretty smart.
For every scenario.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, I know she likes to do some trail running even in the winter. So
there you go.
Yeah. Very good.
Well, at the very least, don't slip. Don't fall.
Yeah.
Because it hurts.
You don't want to have to get injured because you were just running and being dedicated.
All right. Thank you to everyone who always engages and interacts. We love that the most. And with that, let's get started.
Today's main topic, we're diving in to social influences and relationships that help us thrive while running. Well, at least we're going to dive into research and see what it tells us.
So are you trying to give away the
I feel like it didn't
cart
there.
Before the horse? No, that's not how that goes. Well, anyway, yes, that's what we're going to do. But I wanted to make this comment before we do, because it so often is the case when you're looking at things like studies and research, which are good things, but how they focus matters here. And so I want to make this comment, and it's simply this. First, let's begin every assumption here with the reality that people are not sacks of meat.
No, we aren't. We have a heart.
Yes, but that's yes. But the point being, let me try it in another way. Firing synapses do not a person make.
Yeah, we're not just the research.
Aha, there it is. Okay, so we are not just the thing that the brain does in a direct reaction, like a conditioning effect to some kind of stimulus, like all that kind of stuff. People are more complex than that. Personality, spirituality, purpose, meaning in life, all these kinds of things influence how the stimuli we experience actually affect us. And so that being the case, these studies can be fascinating and can be enlightening, and we're going to use these kinds of things to consider something like possible trends that we can act upon for our own benefit. However, nobody is ever going to make the claim, at least on this show, that we are automatically going to do or be the things that these studies might suggest we do or be because of the situations. So part of that also is kind of like a freedom thing, because we're going to free you from social obligation before we even begin to talk here. Because if you're anything like me, you don't even feel social obligation a lot of the time. And so when people start talking about the need for social interaction, you might say to yourself something like I do, which is, nah, or something of that kind. So
nah.
whatever the case may
point.
be, there are clear studyable effects, if that's the right phrase, in the association between social engagement, interactions, experiences, and runners' attitudes and experiences and such.
Yeah.
So,
and as we're thinking about how we can thrive as runners, we often, as runners, make ourselves uncomfortable in order to grow. That's what conditioning
you're doing that again
is.
To me?
That's
you're
what
tell me that I've
conditioning is.
gotta, like,
So what I'm saying is, if we get some information, some good information, and we're able to maybe stretch ourselves and be a little uncomfortable, like Zach often has to do in social circles, that can help us grow. You know, there's often times that kind of stress equals some growth in our lives.
Okay. Well, moving on. So let's start with just a quick preview, I guess you could say. Our main points that we're going to address here. We've got a number of studies that we're going to break down that all focus on some aspect of social influences. And the main points, precisely, are that the people who are most important to us seem to have the greatest effects on our attitudes around things like exercise and running.
That makes sense.
No doubt about it. Now, there's an interesting question around who those people are. We're going to talk about that. It can be fascinating. Also, social experiences cultivate benefits, both perceived and real. So some of the benefits might be in our perceptions, and some of them might, in fact, be realized benefits.
And also might be more experience as well.
So
Hard to measure.
if that helped whet your appetite, well, just know this, before we even begin, we are not going to spend our time here talking about social media.
Right. That's a different aspect.
That, in fact, will be covered next week in a slightly different approach, which will be very interesting. So if you're looking for what do you have to say about social media and its effects on things, coming soon. So let's talk about who affects us most first. Okay, I'm going to take the initial part of this one because these were the ones that I was looking at. Andy and I both kind of like divided and conquered and found some interesting things. So my first one here is a study that came out of the Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology in 1996. I'm intentionally starting with an old study here because it's going to preface some of the other things. But the primary findings of this study in particular, which was entitled Social Influence and Exercise, a meta-analysis. So I like meta-analyses because that's like where they take lots and lots of studies and then they look at the trends within them. And so I like that because you tend to have more data available to you. And so these data tend to produce more common findings. Okay, now the primary findings of this one in particular were no surprise, and I quote, the results showed that social influence generally has a small to moderate positive effect. So in general, all the social influences. However, 4 moderate to large effect sizes were found, and these were in fact nearly, if not more than double the positive effects of other kinds of social influences. And those were, what are the most impactful? No, that's not a word. What are the most effective? Family support had a significant effect on attitudes about exercise. Task cohesion, like we do the thing in kind of symbiosis socially, also had a significant effect on adherence behavior, like your willingness to do the thing with other people in the way they're doing it, that kind of thing. And then also important others, other people who might not be family members, similarly had a significant effect on attitudes about exercise, and family support again had a significant effect, this time on compliance behavior, like the willingness to engage with the thing that other people are trying to get us to engage with in some sense. Okay, so now, that being all the jargon, the key consideration here is clearly the people who are closest to us or most important to us seem to influence our attitudes around things most significantly. So this being the case, what we can assume is that back in 1996, there was one missing link that is significantly present today, which is that we spent most of our time in 1996 interacting with the people who we were closest with, whom we were closest with. Okay? So most of our interactions were with people with whom we most closely aligned, like just in life experiences, right? Today, I argue that is no longer true. I would argue that many of us spend more time interacting with people who have little meaning to us personally.
More time online, virtual.
Exactly.
Experience.
So
Yeah.
now this is where the fascination arises for me. And I mentioned we're going to talk social media next time. But the principle of the matter is, who are the people whose opinion matter most? Right? I'm getting my who and whom's all thrown all over the place right now. Okay, so the people whose opinions matter most to us, those are the people who are going to have the greatest effects on our attitudes and willingness to engage in the running stuff, right? So then it raises the question, if a certain people or person have a significant effect on my attitudes around something, so I'm being very general here, I'm like broadening everything. If I notice these people have great effect on my attitudes on something, those are the people that I'm clearly casting higher weight on their opinions, right? That's the cause and effect here. And so I would encourage everyone listening right now to start that kind of reflective examination for a moment and just think about whose opinion about running matters most to you, and whose opinion about what kinds of things you do with exercise and how you spend that kind of time and the results of it matter most to you. You know, you finish a race, marathon or something, who do you call if you call someone when you get that Boston qualifier?
Or do you just post on social media first?
Now that is the interesting
But
question.
we're going to talk about this next week,
We
Zach,
will
so,
more. I'm not trying
yeah.
to get at the social media right now. I'm trying to get at the more general point, because I don't want to prelude too much of next week. So yes, now that's an interesting reflection, and we're going to come back to that in a little bit more summarizing in a moment. But Andi had a different study which was also really interesting about who matters to us.
Yes. So diving into the degrees in which we can influence one another, exercise contagion in global social network was the name of the research that was done by Nature Communications in 2017. And this is a quote: "Less active runners influence more active runners, but not the reverse." So this means if I see someone who has like a transformation Tuesday, so to speak, where they show what they, where they were at and how far they've come, that's more likely to inspire an engaged active runner than it is someone who is just starting. Which doesn't make real sense to me. I would think that it would be the opposite. Like, look how far you'd be able to go if you were to commit and try. But it actually is the more active runners. This is interesting. Both men and women influence men, but men influence men more, but women influence them moderately. And then only women influence women. Now, this is back in 2017, and this is such a generalization.
We
obviously
should make the obvious conclusion here. Men, those women don't care. All those pictures you're posting, all those self-congratulations.
That's not true. That's not
They're
true.
paying no attention at all. So try a new strategy.
I think this is more, this perhaps would be more of like, I see this person who is similar to me, for instance, like, oh, here's another mom that's had 2 kids who's able to go and achieve this dream that I have been dreaming for a while. Like, she did it, and that really motivates and engages me. So maybe that's part of what this whole conversation is about, but I do think this is a pretty sweeping generalization from their research.
Clearly. Yes.
The quote goes on, "Well, the embeddedness and structural diversity theories of social contagion explain the influence effects we observe. The complex contagion theory does not. These results suggest interventions that account for social contagion will spread behavior change more effectively."
So you're going to explain all those theories of social contagion for us, Andi?
Well,
no, we're not going to try to get into that.
Yeah, I guess not. But yeah, the spread of social behavior change is influenced by these factors. But just keeping in mind that we do have influence on one another, and usually, I'm guessing it's likely with someone who is going through and has similar goals to what we have.
So if the previous study underscored how valuable the effects are from those who are most important to us, this study helps expand the thinking to remember that there are ways that things affect us regardless of whether it's the people who are most important to us.
Sure.
But also, once again, that there are certain kinds of peoples who tend to affect us greater and lesser degrees, depending on who we are. And I think that's really important. Part of it is because, so in all of these things, a diverse exposure, like, so if you're in a very homogenous scenario, like I'm only interacting with my brother and no other humans, right? So that's a highly homogenous scenario because he's my family member and he's the same gender as me and he's generally of similar genetics than me. So that has a certain amount of effect. But what we tend to find is that when you expand the layers, there are certain kinds of diverse exposures that have certain kinds of effects on us. So then, like, if I am observing someone who is less motivated or engaged in it than me having success, that's going to inspire me. And that's great. But if I observe someone who's like just killing it out there and they're having more success, that probably has less influence over me. So like these kinds of layers are fascinating.
Sure.
So part of
that's why we're all so excited about Kira D'Amato is that she had such a large amount of improvement.
Great example,
it's like the
Andy.
underdog.
It is
like,
why people love the underdog.
Yeah.
That's why. Well, it's part of why. There's more layers to that one. But I love this, and I love it for one particular reason here, which is the who in terms of who affects us matters in our experiences. So social isolation limits severely, but certain kinds of isolation, like if I'm only ever interacting, for example, with an Olympian runner, it's significantly less inspiring to me if I'm only ever interacting with that athlete versus if I'm, so you get the point. Okay, I like this. These are good thoughts, but they're not over yet.
Right. That was the section of who affects us most, and now we're moving into how do they affect us.
And if we can divide these two, because obviously there's some layers of overlap there, but there are certain kinds of effects that people have on us in different kinds of ways when we're interacting, and so we wanted to try to break that down a little bit. This first one in particular, I find compelling because it's studied parkrun experiences.
I like park runs. Yeah.
Andy, two times?
No, just
the one?
Well, maybe two.
Andy showed up in a city for work once, just like a random foreign place, city in Ohio or something, and so that's foreign. And then was pursuing like interest in how can I find some people to run with in the area, right? And found out about parkrun.
Yeah.
And some of you are familiar with parkrun. It's
some
not
of you run with
parkrun
parkrun like
Michigan
a lot. So
yes, many of you do, but it's even more popular in Europe. And so that's where this study in particular came from. This was in London. And the study entitled Social Reward and Support Effects on Exercise Experiences and Performance, Evidence from Parkrun. This was published in the Public Library of Science in 2021. Very recent study.
Very recent.
And I like that because we get some prime real estate here, recent study stuff. Okay, so primary findings, and I quote, social factors were associated with greater subjective enjoyment and energy. Higher subjective energy then in turn was also associated with faster run times without any corresponding increase in perceived effort. Well, when we talk about social experiences being motivators for runners, think about like the race setting where there's like hundreds or thousands of other runners showing up there to run the race. Why is it that we feel better nearly every time at a race versus when we're going out and doing a workout by ourselves, or even a workout in a normal setting with other runners, if we go to work out with our workout group? And not just that we feel better, but why is it that we seem to be able to perform better? I'm holding up two fingers, by the way, for those of you not watching. I did one for that first one because it was the first, and then two. Do I need to explain this?
No,
Andy?
you don't need to explain that.
So why? Why do we seem to be able to perform better in these social settings? This is the kind of study that helps prove the why. Now, it doesn't actually tell us why. It just shows us the trend more clearly.
Right.
So that is the key there, though. This social experience is a place where we tend to experience enjoyment or perceived enjoyment and higher energy, or at least perceived energy. Now, the most interesting thing about energy, right? We're going to say this now. We're going to say it 1,000,000 times throughout the future because it's so important for runners.
What is energy?
It, energy perception matters more than anything else Because assuming the underlying factor here is you show up on a race day and you have a certain degree of fitness, right? You have a certain amount of energy available to you based off of how you fueled and all those other things. How you think about your energy levels is going to have a greater effect on your performance potential than just about anything else in that moment. Because it's not that you have some greater strength potential. This study, in fact, found no significant, I'm quoting again, no significant main effects of social factors on actual fatigue or performance were detected. Why? Because you can't lift a heavier bar just because people are around you than you could physically be able to lift without them. But what you can do is tap into a greater amount of your available strength, or in this case, for runners, your available fitness, because of this perception of higher energy.
Yeah. And also, it's more enjoyable.
Well, that's kind of the point.
Right. So even though it helps you run to your fitness level better than, let's say, if you were in your own head and you're running on your own and didn't have the energy of the group. Where in a race, you will feel better. You'll feel like your fitness is all coming together. It's an on day. That's kind of the words that we use as runners. We had an on day. But it's a more enjoyable experience, but you're also more able to reach that fitness potential. But you're not going to exceed your fitness because that's how it works.
Right.
You can run to the capabilities that your body are able to.
There's a simple question that runners are always trying to answer in terms of performance, and it is simply, how can I get the most out of my fitness in this moment possible?
Right.
So if I could know that I answered that question with like the utmost every single time I raced, then I could never be disappointed with a race result, right? Because if I knew when I ran that race every time that I got everything out of my body that was possible to get out of my body in that moment, then how could I be disappointed? Because nothing else was possible, right? And now, of course, I could go back and say, well, maybe I could do things better in training to get more, fitness.
Right.
But on the day, right?
Yeah, we're not talking about training.
This is part of the answer to that question, because we know that these social settings. So yes, we know this, we feel this. Now we have just kind of some information that, fascinatingly enough, points to a very precise reason behind this, which is the subjective perceptions of energy. Cool. Okay, Andi, this one's yours.
This next one, the purposes of this study are actually not what we're diving into, but I'll tell you, I'll be transparent about that. So the study was called How Social is Recreational Running? Findings from a Qualitative Study in London. And this is my caveat. This was for implications for public health promotion. This is by Health Place in 2017. And the study surveyed recreational runners who did not belong to running clubs in London. And they were trying to discover if they could motivate these people with running groups, like entice them to come and join a running community. And it said that these respondents were relatively uninterested in the idea of proper running technique, ambivalent about the presence of others when running, and reticent about being pulled into a more committed collective practice. So
you can't force me is what they're saying.
The results from this study were that maybe they should include some other ways to entice people into better public health.
The summary
because
statement
some people
here
are
is...
just not going to want to run in a group. And there is that part of it too, but let's dive into what they found about these people. They didn't care about their running technique or the presence of others, and they didn't want to be pulled into a committed practice with others. So we want to be we want as runners to grow and to get better, right? So we want to care about our proper running technique and how we can thrive and feel better and run better, right?
Our audience, maybe. Not necessarily.
I guess not everybody. But I guess this is what we're kind of drawing from this, even though this is not what the study was intended for, but that if you are in community, then you might be more interested in running properly and getting the most from yourself and being part of a committed collective practice.
The summary statement for that study is, get off my back. I do what I want. Now, these are the reverse scenario.
Does that resonate with you?
These are the reverse scenario studies, right? where they try to find people who are not part of the, because you always need this, definitely. Okay, so in the assumption here is that people part of the running club groups would have the opposite, where they would feel more interest in their running techniques, and they would feel more interest in being a part of a collective practice. Okay, now, what's the correlation? What's the causation in these kinds of scenarios? So we have to assume that there's a significant potential of the person who's a part of the running group wants those social and collective things already inherently. That's why they're part of the running group. And the person who's not doesn't want them inherently. That's why they're not part of the group, or they would have been joining the part of the group. So there's an element of that potentially here. What you have to do in this scenario, which they did not clearly, is you have to take the people who don't want to be part of the running group, and you have to put them in scenarios where they are in social engagements and interactions, and then you have to test against when they were not, and then you have to start to yield a result as a comparative study. They did not do any kind of comparative study here. That wasn't even the point of it. So this is an example of, like, we want people to do what we want, and so we're going to try to figure out why they're not doing what we want. And the answer is because we don't want to do what you want.
Right. And maybe that
how it goes.
And it's possible that the reaction that they were getting from this survey was just like, I don't want to talk to you about
Who
this.
knows?
You know what I mean?
There's all sorts of corruption that happens in survey results if people don't.
If there's a certain.
If there's a perception associated with the surveying, who knows?
So if you're not part of a running group, you're not someone who. It's
not
that
you're just not as cool as other runners.
Well,
Isn't that it?
No.
Oh, sorry. I thought that's what.
No. So what I'm saying is that you might really care about your running and care about people and care about running as a community sport without being part of a running group. That is A-okay. But we just are bringing to you the studies that are part of this conversation.
Yes. Not everybody wants to do the thing that they like to do with other people.
And Zach is kind of someone who is like that, right?
Sure.
He runs with people sometimes.
Now, on to the final study here for this interesting reflection on the behaviors, or rather, sorry, what was the reflection here? How do other people affect us? Okay, so this one's a rat study, and I probably should have mentioned, I think at least one of these other ones was a rat study too. No, never mind. That was taken out. Okay, so this is a rat study. Social isolation delays the positive effects of running on adult neurogenesis in rats. It never says that in the study title, but it should. In rats. Okay, so by Nature Neuroscience in 2006, and this is a good example of just kind of a really fascinating empirical observation. Okay, so social isolation. We have to assume that is generally not good in order for this study to make sense, because they make that assumption here in terms of on our brain activity. And we already know this. People, this is a rat study, but people as well. People in social scenarios represent significantly higher neurological activity in general than people in isolation scenarios. That's actually one of the reasons why isolation is a torture method as well. It's hard to cope with it and long stretches. Okay, now
which some of us have had to do in the last couple
willingly do though, and so we have to exempt. If you like to be alone better than with other people, and you thrive more like that in some areas or another, you are exempted from what we're about to state here.
Are you saying you are exempted?
Well, no, but I remember how I mentioned earlier, like personality matters here, spirituality matters here. Like there's significant examples. Think about things like the silent Buddhist monks, right? That often, now many times they're in very populated monasteries and such, but often are in significant isolation. But that is willful, meaningful, and spiritual, and it no longer has the same measurable effects as unwillful social isolation or unpurposeful social isolation. So if you are isolated without an intent or meaning for it, that can be detrimental in these ways.
So those of us who've had to do that, or we've been sick or what have you.
Oh man.
And that's unintentional.
Don't broach that dam right now.
Well, I do want to say, if we can create, because as humans, we're not rats. As humans, we can create a meaningful, purposeful time in our isolation. So maybe that's the takeaway from this study, is that if we do insert our ourselves into that isolation, we can perhaps draw more from it and thrive better than if we feel like a victim of our experience.
We have no interest in spending any amount of time talking about COVID at the moment, except for simply to state that every study that you'll hear about or encounter or read right now about the lockdown stuff and all these other things point to this factor as clear evidence that isolation is not good for humans. Specifically, we notice this in very brain-related things, neurological, cognitive, and cognitive behavioral and mental types of things. Okay, so that's all very true. Mm-hmm. Now, what this study was particularly finding was that in the absence of social interaction, get this, a normally beneficial experience like exercise and running, which is what they're studying with these rats, can in fact exert a potentially deleterious influence, like harmful influence on the brain. So in the social isolation scenarios, what tends to happen is something like exercise, especially rigorous exercise, actually becomes a greater stressor, not stress reliever. Now, this is just in rats. Remember, this is unwillful, unpurposeful social isolation. And it actually has greater stressor effects. So there's an element of this now where we could simply state that we know that there is great gains and benefits that can come from social experience and social engagement within things like exercise and running. And we know that some people intentionally and meaningfully choose not to engage with that and can be just fine without it. Mm-hmm. What we encourage in a moment like this, and we could probably move on, Andy, to our primary takeaways and our summary here, we encourage the consideration of how can I engage with others in these things. Not necessarily that I must, not necessarily that it's bad if I don't, but it could help me in some ways. So I should pursue or consider some of those things. And it should start, and this is my important takeaway as I read through all of these studies and have reflected on this many times. And we talk with our athletes. Whenever we talk with a prospective athlete, one of the things we talk about is who are the people in your life who would be affected by you deciding to hire a coach to help you with running, right? And talk to those people before you hire a coach to help you with running. Why? Because the opinions and engagements of the people who matter most to us on something like running has significant influence on that engagement, that experience rather.
Yeah. And this might bring up some emotions for some of you because there's been tension about running in your life and with people that you love and you care about. And there won't always be reconciliation, but if there's a way to have some peace in that relationship or find a way to communicate in such a way that can help you in this, have some sort of mender in that topic of running, it would be very beneficial to you probably in both in your training and then also, of course, in your life.
And it may well be true, but absolutely is something that I would encourage, that if your running sunders important relationships, by pursuing the running, it is causing conflict and rendering relationships. You are causing a forced social isolation on yourself. You are likely subjecting yourself to that study's findings of the greater stressor, not actually helping, but in fact being a greater stressor. And more than anything else, running is not more important than the important people in your life. And so you probably didn't think we were about to say this in this instance, but consider well and consider truly how these things are playing, because we always talk about our goal is to help you thrive in the ways that we're bringing information and these kinds of things. And if running is a negative influence on your life and flourishing, consider the changes that need to happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and all of these are the hard topics of life, right? And we want, like Zach was saying, to help you thrive. And this is a major consideration, how it affects relationships and if we're communicating well. And I do think that in most situations, if you're able to have some honest conversations and talk some things through and have some give and take, that you can be a thriving runner. And that's why we're here. We believe that you can thrive as a runner. So I know that every situation is different, and we can't know what you're going through in your specific situation. But we do believe that in relationships, we do need to have honest communication to help find the place that running serves us in our lives.
So in conclusion, if you're in a slump and you're running in the moment, one thing that you might do that could be helpful is go find a race or go find a group of other runners and go run with some other people.
Yeah.
Even if you don't want to talk to them. You don't have to. Just run next to them.
Side by side. Sure. And making connections and finding community is part of what we're about here at AtoZrunning. And today was evidence that it can help you thrive.
Very true stuff. So lots of heavy things to think about. But before you spend too much time thinking about that, let's get on to the world of running. First, in the world of running, let's give a quick shout out to some A to Z runners who ran the blizzarding conditions
single digit
of the Groundhog Marathon, half marathon, or 1/6 marathon. And yes, it was cold. It was snowy. Well, at least it was snow on the ground, and it was all over the ground. And so it was rough running. For those of you who did that, not just our people, but anyone who did that, props to you. That's not easy.
Major props.
But let's give a quick shout out to Lewis, Carl, Andrew, Mark, and Brandon, who all braved those elements. And I don't know about Punxsutawney Phil and whether he made an appearance, but you did the good fight.
Well, speaking of indoor races, one that was not in the elements, the 2022 New Balance Indoor Grand Prix occurred this past weekend. The men's 3,000, Adel McCall ran the Spanish and European indoor record of 7:30.82. So that was a speedy time by him. The men's 800, Mariano Garcia upset American Bryce Hoppel to win the 800 in another Spanish indoor record of 1:45.12. So this happened like really close to one another, getting those records. And Garcia, he made his move off the first turn of the final lap. Hoppel was actually leading, and it looked like Hoppel was going to win, and Hoppel just couldn't stay with him.
Nope.
So,
apparently not.
yeah, Garcia ended up taking the win and getting that record for Spain. In sixth place was 18-year-old Will Sumner, who set U.S. high school indoor records in the 500. I didn't realize that they kept that. The 600, and he's run 21.66 for the 200, 47.69 for the 400. So he's really fast in a lot of different distances. Sumner took a crack, though, at this race at Josh Hoey's 147.67 indoor high school record, and then Sumner ended up just being a second off that time. So it was just a really impressive performance from an 18-year-old.
That indeed.
Mm-hmm. And then in the women's 3,000, Canada's Gabrielle Dupuis-Stafford set a national record. And she did so sometimes in a flaming fast last lap, 29.04 to win. And she ran a time of 8:33.92.
Nice. Yeah. And for those of you who aren't terribly familiar with indoor track, the track size is generally, not always, because they're not all the same, but is usually half the size of an outdoor track. Right. So 200. When we say last lap, it's half a lap in terms of outdoor track standards. So 29
would put her at 58.
Well, she didn't run 29 for the first.
No, the last one. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
But if you were to if that was a 400, it'd be a 58. That's the pace.
Well, if she kept that pace.
Exactly. Yes. I'm just trying to put it in perspective,
but
guys.
But she didn't.
I know. Okay. Whatever. Okay. So she ran an 8:33.92, which is now Canada's new best time in that distance. And then Josette Norris, we mentioned her last week. She ended up in third place, running a personal best time of 8:37.91. And I mentioned her because she's been running so well, and then to get another personal best, we definitely want to keep our eyes on her for the U.S. And then the women's 800, Jamaica's Natoya Goul became the first women's 800 runner-up to dip under 2 minutes this year in 2022, and she won in a time of 1:59.62, and she led wire to wire.
Yep. When you're going that fast, no surprise.
Speaking of the New Balance Grand Prix, the 7th place runner for the 3,000 meter women's race was Annie Rodenfels, and she ran a personal best time of 8:46.07. And side note, within a second of her was Katie Izzo, who has contributed to AtoZrunning.com before, and we've connected with her. She now runs pro for Adidas. We talked to her when she's a college athlete. But I want to talk about Annie Rodenfels because she is another one to watch. She runs for the team BAA and Adidas. She runs with Erica Kemp. Erica Kemp is one of her teammates. But she ran D3 in college, and she has been progressing since then. She was a great steeplechase runner there. And Rodenfels, she coaches right now track and field and cross country at, how do you say that? Wellesse's College?
I have no idea.
Okay. And this is the story I want to tell you. Annie was scheduled to pace at the Danville season opener in the 5,000. She's going to get paid some money to bring them through a 3,000 meters. But she ended up finishing the race with a massive PR and a world-leading time. She won the race in a time of 15:08.
So
0.80.
That's one of those moments where all the other runners are watching her pace them, waiting for her to step off the track, and then starting to get like, what's happening here? She's still going. Wasn't she supposed to be stopping a while back there? No, okay, maybe she's going an extra lap. That's very nice of her. Thank you for taking us an extra lap. And then another lap in. What's happening? She's still there. And then now she's pulling away. Where's my pacer going?
Mm-hmm.
And then that person who was really quite confident that she was winning that race discovered all too late she was not.
Yeah, that's why I got to stay with the pacer sometimes. This has happened in multiple races. I remember in 2020 or 2021, we had that story of the man in the marathon who won all this money, this prize purse, and he was the pacer. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and the way these things go, there's often one of two scenarios in a pacing agreement. So you agree to pace the race, and either you agree to step off at a certain time, no matter what, like I'm not going to finish the race, or there's a contingency that's like, I'll step off by this time, or I'll try to stay in the race. You know, either or.
Right.
And
if they're going for times, a lot of times if they just want there to be fast times or there's a qualifying market that people are wanting to run, they prefer for that pacer to stay in as long as possible and to the finish line is fine because they're going for a time.
So indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how about
Number
what
3?
to shout at runners?
Yeah, so Runners World UK did an article about the things that you should shout at runners during races. So researchers at Plymouth Marjan University revealed that the right positive encouragement from crowds can boost a runner's performance.
Huh.
The research, this is a quote, led to a handy acronym for the next time you're cheering at a race.
Does it start with "Run, Forrest, run"?
Oh, no.
That's number one. Always shout that at every runner you see.
You didn't need to bring that up. Like, all of us are rolling our eyes right now. Okay.
Exactly.
IMPACT is the acronym. Instructional and practical advice and encouragement.
Oh, yes. Forearm angles. Forearm angles.
That's an inside joke, Zach.
Move your eyes. Back and forth. Back and forth.
These are both.
Those are literally things that we've heard coaches shout at runners on
But
track.
I love instructional motivation and encouragement. If you say, eyes up, Andy, or you say, drive your knees, pump your arms. Like,
or reach for the sky.
Okay, Zach. Okay. I like instructional encouragement. So just, if you see me at a race, you can tell me some things to do with my form. That will help me out.
Especially, don't suck. That's very motivating to Andy.
That's not helpful. All right, motivational, great effort, like things like great effort, you're doing great. And then personalizing things with your name, the running club or charity, making eye contact with the runner. So any way you can make it personal.
Especially if it's sustained long-term eye contact.
That would be
like
just
maybe even try to like run right in front of them, next to them, looking back at them.
No.
Eye contact, uninterrupted.
That's creepy. But yeah, if you see someone running and there's something on their jersey, like maybe AtoZrunning, you would say, "Hey, go AtoZrunning!" Make it more personal, and that's more encouraging than just "Go runners." That will add a personalized factor. And I love what Kyle Cutler told us way back when we were talking about some tips for race day on a podcast episode with him, but he said a tip would be to write your name on your bib. So if they don't print it out with your name on it, write your name, and then people will say, no, go Andi, go Zach, and that will motivate you more and increase your performance, apparently, according to this research. So
a good strategy then for spectators is to get a bunch of your friends together and write a few names on a sign. And then, so each of you has a different sign with a few different names on it, just random names. You just find whatever names work. And then hold the signs up and just yell those names as everyone's going by, and you'll land at some point or other.
Are you saying this because you know that I did that in college? Okay, so I didn't make signs, but I would yell during college races, or actually maybe it was high school. I don't remember, but I would yell like names like "Go John," and you'd see like 4 guys like pop up, and you're like their form gets better, and it's like, oh, like there's 4 Johns in that crowd.
Except there's only 4 people in the race on the track, and so if you
might not work as well.
Then it's pretty obvious to every single one of them that you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, but in large races, it does work. It's kind of fun to see everyone pop up when their name is called out. And excellent. I would actually pretend that people were saying my name. This is kind of embarrassing to admit, but like if someone's like, go Sally, I'd pretend that they're saying go Andi in my head.
And then she would say, thank you.
I actually would like pretend. Back, yeah, and I'd smile at them like, you're cheering for me, aren't you?
And they'd shake their head, no.
It's a great thing to have a good imagination sometimes. So the last one... there's 2 more. Authentic and non-judgmental. So like if you said something as an observation, like that's a great charity you're running for. Oh,
so the don't suck one is probably
that's
judgmental.
That might be judgmental. Yeah,
a bit
that might
inauthentic.
be judgmental. Or something like, oh, you have great form. So it's not an instructional like the previous that we were saying, but it's saying like you got great form. And then finally, confidence building. You can do this. And then tailor to the distance. You only have half mile to go. But
as long as it's accurate.
That's the kicker. They found in this research that anytime there was something inaccurate, it actually was unhelpful. And it's now proven, but we all knew that, right? If someone says, oh, you only have 1 more hill left to go, and you already know that there's like a few more hills, or they tell you the wrong distance that you have left in the race, it just kind of makes you feel irritated.
Anyone been in a marathon before, like around mile 18 or something, and someone says, you're almost there? And you're like, you loser. I've got the hardest part still to go. You just made me hate my life.
So accurate information is always good. So false information, no bueno.
No, indeed. Well, as it were, there are still many great things that you can say and do to benefit or be benefited by other people. And it's a nice... Oh, go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to say, I take it on myself at races, and many of you guys do too. If I'm not in a race, I don't just cheer for the person that I know that I came to cheer them on, but I'm cheering for all the runners. If you have the opportunity to do that, if you're spectating a race, I know it does take some energy sometimes, but like take it on as your role, that you could be like helping other people achieve their goals and shout things at them that could be impactful. Remember, that's the acronym IMPACT. And then, it could benefit the running community. I'm just putting that out there because I've been to a lot of races where it's like dead silent and there's tons of people there. And then I've actually asked, this is another embarrassing thing I'm admitting to all of you, but I've actually asked them, I'll like wave my hands at myself, like, give me some.
Oh, yeah, that is embarrassing.
I know. Like, Hey guys, like I'm
usually
working
when
hard.
People do that, it's because the crowd's going crazy, and so it's just like pump them up.
Oh no, if you need it, ask for it.
I find that when that happens,
sometimes I need some
I just
energy.
cheer for the spectators because then at least someone's cheering. But back to the episode conclusion that I was beginning before Andi had another thought. There are many ways that interacting with other people have positive influences over our running experiences. And that's one of those key takeaways that we always consider. In what ways can I engage with other people positively to my own and to their benefits? And those are good considerations for all of us, especially when you're kind of in a slump, when you're hitting some of the hard moments like the deep cold of a West Michigan winter, which is kind of where we live and kind of what many people are experiencing who are listening to this right now. So find those social experiences that can indeed have some kind of positive influence. And if you're having a hard time finding ways to engage with some other people, at a minimum, one way you can engage with other people is by sending comments, questions, and those kinds of things to us in all the places where we have places with content, like social media, YouTube, or certainly go to AtoZrunning.com. And you can send us questions, you can fill out a contact form, you can do all that kind of stuff. We would certainly love to interact with you, to hear your thoughts, and to share some thoughts back, if indeed it is fitting and desired. So, with that, stick around, because next week we're going to be talking about social media and how that interacts a bit with us as runners.
Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.